All right, so the first thing we're going to be talking about is our fascia board, okay? So probably the most important thing that you need to know as a gutter installer, because if the fascia board is rotten, you do not want to hang a gutter on it, because what will happen is you're going to hang it on there and then it's going to fall out. And the last thing we want is our customer calling us saying that we did a bad job because we installed on rotten fascia board. Now, as a gutter installer, that is our job to know, because we are the ones that are supposed to be inspecting this to make sure that we can put gutters on it, all right? So, you know, obviously if there's a siding guy there, if there's someone that does fascia boards, they're gonna be the ones to fix it, but we need to do that before hanging. So if there's ever a case where, you know, we're hanging a gutter, the fascia board seems like it's too rotten or it's very old to hang on, you know, either call me, call one of your managers, tell the customer, hey, you know, we're gonna install the rest of the house, but I would suggest that you guys get these 2 fascia boards replaced before we actually hang these gutters. And that'll actually let them appreciate us more for being honest with them instead of us just trying to rush it and get a paycheck on it, all right? So this is our fascia board, okay? And typically these are anywhere from 6 to 8 inches long. They can be 4, they can be 10. Most of the time they're gonna be 6 to 8 inches, all right? And what'll happen is our gutter will actually sit on this fascia board. So our hangers will screw into here, and so on, all right? This board is typically anywhere from 3/8 of an inch to 1.5 inches thick. It's usually not any thicker than that or thinner. Obviously, in some situations, you're gonna come across some oddballs where, you know, it's either thicker or thinner, or it's bigger or shorter, all right? But in most situations, it's just gonna be your standard size, you know, 6 to 8 inches long, about 1 inch thick. All right. One thing to note is that this is a flat fascia board, okay? 95% of the houses that we will do will have a flat fascia board, all right? It's more so when we get into the older properties or older homes that they actually have angled fascia boards. So instead of it being like this, it now sits like this. And what this does is it creates a gap. So you might be wondering, well, how are you gonna screw a hanger in here and the gutter is gonna be flapping around like this? So we would actually insert what's called a wedge, all right? Now, in our gutter terms video, you guys can see what that tool does, but pretty much it'll close this gap. It'll make a right triangle and close up this gap. So the gutter will actually sit on an angle like this, all right? But it's not gonna be moving back and forth. It's gonna be secure into the fascia board, and it's gonna be sturdy because we have, it's called a wedge. We have wedges here, here, and so on to make sure that it comes off of the fascia board, all right? In very, very rare situations, maybe on an old cabin or, you know, something like that with a metal roof, we would have no fascia board, all right? In that situation, we would use something called a vampire hanger, okay? So instead of, you know, our regular hanger that we would use to screw in here, we would use a different style of hanger, and the hanger has a long metal attachment to it, all right? And it has a bunch of holes in it. Now, again, this can be viewed in our gutter terms video, okay? So what that piece of metal does is you can actually lift up the shingle and you slide that piece of metal underneath the shingle, all right? Or if you're doing this before they're putting on a new roof, you would just go directly on the wood, all right? And then they would lay down the shingles over top of it or the metal roof or whatever the case may be, all right? Now, you will rarely have to use that. I'm assuming if you're working for the company for 5 to 10 years, maybe one time you'll ever have to come across using those hangers. But it's important to know because you may come across it, all right? So again, this is our fascia board. We want to make sure that when we knock on this, we get a nice solid wood sound, all right? If you start hearing that it's not sounding like that or it's hearing soggy, like it feels, you can hear that it's not sturdy wood, that's when you know that you need to get this replaced before we hang it on there, all right? Also, if you feel on the wood, on the corners especially, it's gonna be on the ends of the wood more than likely because that's where the water usually meets. If it feels soft or it feels squishy or like it's bubbling up, probably means it needs to be replaced, all right? Now, it can be a little bit damaged, but if it's very bad to the point where, you know, you can literally see the water coming out of it when you push on it and it's squishy, then it's gonna be time to replace that fascia board. All right, so the next thing we're gonna be discussing are drip edge. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, what is a drip edge? A drip edge sits underneath the shingles, okay? And it's just a little piece of metal that rides along the edge of this fascia board, okay? And a lot of times you'll have a little second piece of smaller wood underneath here. I'm not exactly sure what this is called. All right, it's just another addition to the fascia board. So it's more than likely going to be sitting on the fascia board itself. Like in this situation down here, it's just on the fascia board. But for looks and, you know, for appearance wise, a lot of times they will add another board in between it, you know, half the size of the fascia board, just to give the home, you know, an extra addition of, you know, aesthetics or whatever you want to call it. So with this drip edge, it's important that when we're installing the gutter, we go behind the drip edge. All right, so you can see here, well, you can't really see, but I can almost fit my finger behind this whole thing without really having to push it too much. All right, so with a gutter, you're using a 0.29 of an inch. So like, it's very thin metal, so it's very easy to slide behind here. But it's important that when we're putting the gutters on, we don't cover this drip edge, because what will happen is when the water drips over these shingles, you would think, okay, well, the water's gonna fall off, so why does it matter? Well, a lot of times if it's a heavy rain, the water will build up underneath this shingle right here, all right, underneath here, and it'll actually connect to this drip edge and then start dripping off of here. And the drip edge is used to protect your fascia board, because when you have this on there, the water will drip off of the shingles onto the drip edge, and then it'll drip into your gutter, okay, or off of your fascia board in this case. All right. Now, obviously, we would not be hanging a gutter on this slanted angle, but it is a little bit easier to show you guys. So it's very important that when we remove the old gutters from the home, after we get done removing the old gutters, we go around and we make sure that these drip edges, all right, are pulled up enough to when we put our new gutter on there, we can slide it right behind there. All right. Now, in some situations, if you have a 75-foot run, an 80-foot run, you may have to cut this drip edge at some points and pull it forward, because what's going to happen is you're going to get to the point where the drip edge isn't even being, like, the gutter's not even touching it. So let's say, you know, it's underneath, and then it starts to slowly come down here. As long as this drip edge is farther than the aluminum that we're hanging the gutter on, it is okay. But again, we want to make sure that we're not putting the gutter directly on top of this, because one, when you puncture it, it allows water to seep through those cracks and rot the fascia board. Another thing is when you put it on top of it, it just allows the water to go behind the gutter, which in time, it's going to make the fascia board rot even faster than it would without having a gutter on there, because, you know, the condensity of it and the water just sitting there without being able to go anywhere, it doesn't have time to dry. So it'll start to make the fascia board rot, and then the gutter will start to fall off the home. And that's a lot of the times we see, you know, these repair jobs. The reason why we do have to actually, you know, replace the fascia board and rehang their gutter, even though they just got new gutters a few years ago, is because guys don't know what they're doing, and they go directly over this drip edge right here, and then it causes problems. And then you'll start to see that the water drips behind the gutter, and then that's when you're going to have issues. So again, drip edge, it sits underneath the shingles. It protects the fascia board from getting wet, all right? And you want to ensure that the gutter sits behind this drip edge at all times, all right? So it's going to slide behind there, not over the top of it. All right, so the next thing we're going to be discussing is our shingle overhang. So one of the most important aspects of hanging your gutter, all right? And a lot of companies miss this, and that's why you get a lot of callbacks. So it's very important to note here that this is correctly done. So you can see we have our shingle ends here, okay? And then if we put our fingers here, we have about a one inch overhang, okay? So this is called shingle overhang. If you're on the gutter install truck, you're gonna be hearing this 15 times a day, okay? Because when you measure the gutter, you always want to measure to not the end of the fascia board, all right? You can measure the end of the fascia board, but then you have to know, okay, how much of a gap is between the fascia board and the shingle, okay? Right? So in this case, it's about an inch. I know you guys can't see that, but I put my fingers underneath here. It's about 3/4 of an inch, all right? So when you're hanging your gutter and you measure directly to the fascia board, it would have stopped here, right? And what's gonna happen is this water is gonna come off the roof and it's gonna miss the gutter, or it's gonna hit the side of this, and there's gonna be water start to build up on here, and then you're gonna have mold, and then you're gonna have green spots, and you're gonna have tiger striping and everything else. So it's important that you wanna make sure that you're having the gutter far enough over, right? So that way when the water comes down this roof, all of it goes into the gutter, and it doesn't go past the gutter, okay? So when we're measuring these, again, you want to note that how far the shingle overhang is. So when we get to a house, right when we get to the house, after we take off the gutters, we're going to note, okay, how much of a shingle overhang is there? So whenever we do a measurement, you're going to measure the fascia board, and we're going to write that number down on the board, okay? Now, when we first get to the job, we're going to write down what the shingle overhang is. So if it's 3/4 of an inch, you know 3/4 of an inch, right? Now, some situations in the house, you know, not all these guys know what they're doing. So it could be 3/4 in one spot. It could be 2 inches in one spot. Okay. So it's important to know that when you're measuring, you're looking at this every time. All right. But generally it should be the same if they did things correctly. So when one person measures the shingle overhang, write it on the board. And then every time you do a measurement and there's a shingle overhang, you want to add, you know, whatever it is, 3/4 of an inch or an inch or however much. Now, that would be to get it directly in line with this, right? But we want to make sure that this water gets into this gutter. So we're going to go ahead and add even probably another inch, okay? So if we have 3/4 of an inch and then we have an inch here, that's almost 2 inches. It's an inch and 3/4, all right? So even though we got, let's say we got, you know, 16 feet 4 inches for the fascia board, right? Although it's 16 feet 4 inches, we still need to add those extra 2 inches because we want to make sure that the water, when it drips off of the shingle, goes into the gutter. So when you're measuring gutters, a lot of the times you're going to be measuring more than you think. And it's always better to be longer than shorter, because if we make this run and we're directly in line with the fascia board or with the shingles, we're going to have to take this gutter off and we're not going to be able to use it anymore. So if you do it, you know, 3 inches long every time, then you can set the gutter up here, say, okay, it's 3 inches long. I need to go back down and take off another inch, right? To still allow us to have those 2 inches right here, right? These 2 inches from the fascia board. So that way this gutter has an overhang, right? So it goes past the shingles. Now, customers sometimes will say, hey, you know, that gutter looks a little long. Why is it like that? Well, you're going to explain to them the exact same thing I just told you guys. Well, ma'am, look, if the shingle is directly in line with the gutter, a lot of that water that comes off the roof is going to drip onto the gutter or drip over the gutter. And the whole point of having a gutter is to collect the water from the roof. So again, very important, shingle overhang. You always want to make sure that you're going an inch past where the shingle ends, right? So it's going to be usually 2 inches from the fascia board. So 2 inches from the fascia, 1 inch from the shingle, all right? But you really don't have to look at the fascia board. If you just measure directly to where the shingle is, right, you can just add an inch from there. But it's harder to have a tape measure grab onto here than it is on a piece of solid wood, all right? So that is shingle overhang. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna be discussing is we're on top of the roof now. We're gonna be talking about a few things that you guys should know when you're walking on the roof for safety and as well as for the best being of their home. So we don't want to be messing up people's homes because we're there to provide a service, help them out, not make their problems worse, all right? So when we're up on top of this roof, okay, you can see that our peak goes left and our peak goes right. Now, in the perfect world, we should be able to walk on this, right? If you can hear that, and you can almost see it, it starts to squish down, all right? And what this is, it's a ventilation system, and a lot of homes have this just to let the moisture and, you know, everything else get out of the house, all right? As well as it's for heating issues, keeping their roof ventilated, keeping their house ventilated, things like that, all right? So you want to make sure that when you're walking on these roofs, you never walk on these peaks, all right? Even if there isn't this ventilation system on there, you still don't want to walk on the peaks, because what will happen is, like, if we look over here, if we step right here, these shingles are going to start to flare up on the sides, all right? And we never want that to happen. So when we're walking, we always want to make sure our feet are like almost like a duck. So you want to be your feet spread out past this peak. So it's a little awkward walking, but I'm going to show you guys an example of it when I'm walking here. So like this. All right. You need to turn around, okay? It's like I'm taking a breathalyzer test or a DUI test, all right? So again, you're gonna walk like this, okay? It feels a little awkward, but it actually allows you to be more stable than walking on basically a tightrope. If you lean the one wrong way, you might fall. So again, make sure your feet are past this point, all right? So that when we walk, we're not damaging this ventilation system or doing any damage to their shingles. And we're also keeping ourselves safer by not trying to balance on a skinnier point, all right? So this is our roof peak, I guess you can call it, the peak of our roof. And if we pan over here, we can talk about our valley. So same case. Now it does seem like, you know, the most sense to walk right in between this valley, all right? But the problem with that is there's already enough water that comes here. So whenever people get roofs replaced, this is usually the first thing to go. And you can see that this almost looks a lot more darker than the rest of the roof. And that's because the shingles are starting to go missing on this roof, all right? So the water goes down here. So there's always constant water coming in here. So this is probably the weakest point of the entire roof. So same thing, we never want to walk inside of this, all right? Although it may seem comfortable and more safer, we never want to do that. We want to walk same way, spread out like this, in between here, all right? So this can be called a valley, an eaves trough, whatever, all right? But you want to make sure that you're walking on the outsides of it and never in the middle like this, because again, you're going to damage their shingles, and there's already enough water going in these valleys, so we don't want to make things worse for our customers. So the next thing we're going to be discussing here is, there's a few things we're going to be talking about, but this whole system, from this point, right, where the brick starts or brick ends, to where our fascia board is, this whole thing is called an eaves trough, okay? So a lot of times, you know, pest control guys or anyone that's really kind of just explaining damage, okay, will say, oh, your eaves trough is messed up or your eaves trough has damage. Well, a lot of times it's not the entire eaves trough. It's just either their fascia board right here, okay, or their soffit, all right, or their ventilation system underneath their soffit, their vents, or this fascia board. So most people, when they're discussing this, they won't tell you this correctly because they'll have a problem with one board or one function of the eaves trough, and they'll try to tell you that the whole thing is messed up. So we're just going to recap what actually goes into the eaves trough, so that way when you're talking with customers, you know the difference between the entire eaves trough system, which contains multiple different components, or just one component of the eaves trough. So this right here is our fascia board, okay? Now, most houses are going to have two fascia boards. They'll have one that connects from the brick of their home, all right, to their soffit. Now, a soffit allows things like ventilation systems to go in, lights coming down. A lot of people have, you know, a lot of the newer houses have lights that come off of their soffits, all right, to keep their home lit up, make it look nicer. But in most cases, they're used for ventilation, all right? So we're gonna have our fascia board here, all right? And then we have our soffit that sits parallel to the ground. So it sits flat like this. It never sits like this. It always sits flat, all right? And again, this can be this big, it could be this big. It doesn't matter. It depends typically on the size of the home, but there is gonna be usually ventilation systems that go in there, and as well as, you know, sometimes, like I said, those soffit lights. So these ventilation systems are very important for the house, like I said, to make sure that, you know, bad gas can get out of the house, to make sure that their ventilation system is working, their heating and their cooling, everything like that, all right? As well as this is like, if there's an attic in there, it keeps the heat it keeps it getting too hot in the summertime, and it also, you know, in the wintertime, it gets cold no matter what, but it's supposed to help out with that, but it really doesn't. So again, we have our fascia board, our soffit, our ventilation system, and then we have another fascia board up here where our gutter always will connect to. So this is the fascia board that we're mainly going to be looking at when we're doing gutters. Any of this stuff isn't us to take care of, but it is important to know when you're talking to customers. So this is only the board that we're really always focused on. This fascia board, we need to make sure that it's solid, all right? We need to make sure that it's not squishy, like we had talked about, all right? And your gutter will sit on this fascia board, all right? Now, another thing that I want to show you guys real quick while we're here is if you take a look up here, right, you can see that there is a small gap, all right? There's a small gap. It's very small, but there is still a gap. This is not completely tight to the fascia board. So what's going to happen is when that water comes off of the drip edge, if they didn't install this correctly, water will actually start to drip behind this gutter, all right? And what that does is it causes this fascia board to rot. So a lot of times when we're getting new gutter systems, you know, I tell customers, hey, you know, it's time when your gutter is starting to separate from your fascia board. And typically that's just because, you know, a lot of people have the old gutter spikes. And if you have the old gutter spikes, usually your gutter system's around 15 to 20 years old, because they made that switch right around 2010, right? People started using the hangers versus the nails, or the, you know, the spikes. So it's very important to know that this is tight to the fascia board, because if it's not, a lot of times they either need to get it repaired, or they just need to get a few hangers, you know, thrown in there to tighten that back up. But that is typically what we look at when we're trying to know if someone needs new gutters or not. So it's important to know. But again, just to recap, this whole system right here is the eave trough from your fascia board, your soffit, your other fascia board, your vents, everything like that, that is inside of this from here to here is your eaves trough system. So the next thing we're going to be discussing here is our underwater drainage system, or usually in most cases, our corrugated piping. So a lot of times when we do new gutter installs, the customers don't want a downspout to come out and just come out right here, all right? A lot of customers, they want their water to be as far away from their house as possible. Now, in the perfect world, this does make sense. Now, one problem with this is that you can see here, down here, this pipe is already cracking, okay? Now, what this is caused from is things like clogs. When the water freezes and it gets too cold, it'll crack that pipe. This stuff is pretty cheap, all right? Now, a lot of the old gutter systems you're gonna see are gonna have this corrugated piping running all the way underneath the ground, all right? And what's gonna happen is it comes underneath the ground here, and then there's these little things called pop-ups, all right? So you can see here in the ground, there's a pop-up, all right? Now, with this one, they all just come off like this, and it's supposed to have a cap on here that comes up to let water in and out, all right? And it doesn't let the leaves back in, but you can see that if I'm looking down here, right, that is all filled with dirt, okay? It's all filled with dirt. So this gutter isn't even draining water right now. And the problem is that in order to do this the correct way, right, where the pipes don't get clogged and they don't get messed up, is to use PVC piping, which is something like this, all right? So this PVC piping can handle, you know, it can handle all types of weather. It's not gonna break, it's not gonna crack, all right? And a lot of times these old houses, they just run this same black piping underneath the ground. And what happens is when the water sits in there, it freezes, it breaks it, and then even if you can somehow clean this out, right? Let's say you use, okay, ready? Just keep it going. All right, so the only way to really clean this out would be to snake it, right? So even if you have like, you know, like a little handheld snake that if you're a plumber and you're doing it for a toilet, that's not gonna work, because you're trying to pull up 30 pounds of dirt or more underneath of a thing that's probably been clogged in there for 5 to 10 years, right? So typically when we unclog these, we use an electric snake, and it's basically a machine. We set it here, we stick it down there, and it spins and it spins and it spins and it rips out all of that dirt, right? The problem with that is when you use that machine, that can usually crack the pipe even more than it is right now. And if it's already cracked, right, no matter what, if you clean it, when it starts to rain again and the water gets mixed down there, right, there's gonna be mud that comes in from that crack, and then it's gonna fill up again. So typically, if you have these and they're not draining, the only way to fix it properly is to either remove the system that's currently there and add in an elbow, right, and just have the gutter, the downspout come out, you know, to here, right? Or it would be to completely replace this system with a new one, such as, you know, a PVC system, because if you're using PVC pipe, you can use corrugated piping here and then connect it to a PVC right here, and then it's going to drain all the way underneath here. So that way, you know, the water, it's not going to break the pipe, and you're going to be able to have a clean drainage system for the rest of however long. Now, even with the PVC, you know, if things break like this, again over here, if things break, you're still going to get that buildup underground, right? And that's never good, because you can obviously see that that's not draining right now. All right, and while I'm talking about that, all right, I'm going to show you guys the problems that this can cause of not taking care of this or not doing it, you know, the normal way of just having a regular downspout, which I usually prefer to do, because like I said, that way you can see, you know, where the water is going. There's not a mystery of, oh my God, is it clogged in there? Is it not clogged? Is that why? You know what I mean? But it is useful when you do it the correct way with the PVC. But in most cases, they use this old cheap shit. and it doesn't work. So some problems that we can look at this, right? You can see here, if we look at this house, right? We have the dirt is touching the brick in this case, right? It's touching the brick here, right? Now, if we pan over here, all right, and we look, you can see how much this is dug out. Look how much dug out this is. The dirt is supposed to be up to here, right? Or even higher. It should be like right here. But look how much over time that water, instead of draining out, it's coming out right here, or it's coming out up here, and it's just going into the foundation of this home, right? And what's going to happen is this basement is going to leak over time, and it's going to flood because all the water is just sitting right here and seeping into the foundation. It's seeping into the brick. It's seeping into the soil. And you can see how much over time that's actually dug out this. It's just like a big rivet in the ground. And also, this can be caused from things like this. You can see here again that this gutter is not sitting on this fascia board properly. It's pulling off the fascia board, right? And like I said before, if it's pulling off the fascia board, that water is going to drip right here, and it's going to sit in this same valley right here. And it's going to continue to break down the foundation and continue to get your basement wet and continue to flood your house unless you fix this, right? Also, you can see here, there's a big dividend pulled out here. A lot of that water is shooting out from here and going into this. I'm assuming that you don't want to have a bunch of holes in your lawn when you're walking around. And also, when this fills up with water, this water goes right back to the foundation. So the easiest fix for this would be literally pull this off, fill that with dirt, cut it here, right? And then we just add a downspout that flows this way, or we add a downspout that goes away from the home, okay? Now, a lot of people are like, oh, well, what if I have to cut it with my lawnmower and I have to move it? Well, what would you rather do? Move your downspout or have your basement flood? That's how we look at it, right? So I want to make sure that your downspout comes away from your house, a good 3 or 4 feet. So that way when we look at this, right, it's coming away from the home, okay? And it's going to be going downhill. If we were to put this downspout, right, if we were to put this downspout and have it come only to right here, the water's still going to come back down here, fill up there, and fill up there. So it's very important that we want to have the downspout coming down on a down slope away from the home, all right? So installers, very important to note, you don't want to cheap out on, going a foot shorter because we want to save money. I would rather make sure that we have the water getting away from their home, all right? And away from their home so that way their foundation doesn't get messed up and they don't call us back complaining, okay? Another thing that we can add on these gutter systems is called a hinge. So I don't have any hinges with me now, but what it does is it allows us to connect that elbow here, and we can actually fold this downspout up and down. So, if you're afraid that, hey, when we're cutting our grass, I don't want to damage the downspout. Well, before you cut your grass, take a quick lap around your house and just take your downspout, fold it up, and then fold it up, and then continue walking around, all right? And these hinges are very useful. The problem is people cut their grass, right? They'll forget to walk back around and put the hinges back down, and then you have the same issue where the water is going directly into the foundation of the home, all right? And I know that I just talked a little bit, briefly about the foundation of the home, but the whole point of a gutter system is to keep your foundation clean and dry, right? Because the gutters are on your house to keep the water away from your house. Now, really the only way that the water can get into your home, well, it can get in through your windows, it could get in through your fascia board, but in most situations, the water is going to be going into your basement from this point, all right? And this is typically caused from, like I said, improper installations with these drainage systems, or just, guys cheaping out and not having long enough downspouts. So again, that is our foundation, and that is why we need to keep it clean, protected, and dry from the water that comes down our downspouts. All right, so a few more examples of a bay window. So this bungalow here has about eight cuts, right? So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So whenever we have these, we just would say bay window, all right, or bay window gutters, because they are all set up the same way. We could, say the bungalow, but we know that these angles are they're all special angle. Once we find one, they're all the same for the rest of them. So, if it's 130 degrees for these ones, it's going to be 130 for all of them, okay? Another example, if we look over here, here's another bay window, right? Comes off, same thing. You have 3 different sections. It's not a straight run. And you can see that this is cut on an angle that meets the same thing as the fascia board, so they match, right? So the fascia board is the same angle as this gutter would be, right? Because if you don't cut it the right way, you're gonna have separation, and then when you have separation, you're gonna have things like this. You're gonna have your foundation start to crack, all right? So those are our bay windows. It's important to know what that is because you will be having to do that quite a bit.